Legislation, and I don't want to take too much of the House's time this afternoon to talk about it, but there are some issues that concern us that weren't addressed by the Select Committee that I think it's important to raise. And the first was the issue that my colleague from Labor has just been talking about, which is whether this commission, this body that is set up to manage our electoral process, one of the most significant decisions that citizens can make in any country, one fiercely defended and fought for, what kind of body it should be. How independent should it be from Parliament? What should be its status? And we were strongly of the view that the Electoral Commissioner, I think that's the right phrasing, the Chief Registrar of Electors should be an officer of Parliament. And I've read through the Select Committee justification for why that wasn't the case, and I have been in other meetings where we've discussed this issue too, and I am not convinced that it's inappropriate for the Officer of Parliament role to be accorded here. One of the justifications for not was that there's a requirement that an Officer of Parliament provide a check on the arbitrary use of power by the Executive, and the justification for not having an Officer of Parliament system was that the Electoral Commission would not be responsible for scrutinising the Executive. But those two things, in my view, are different. It is different to be a check on the arbitrary use of power from scrutinising the Executive. The purpose of electoral law management, if you like, which is what this Commission does, is to make sure that the rules are undertaken fairly and in accordance with the law. The role of having a check on the arbitrary use of powers by the Executive is to make sure that the Executive, which is the government at the time and therefore has the numbers to make any law it chooses at any time it chooses, is not used to interfere with a fair and democratic process. And why wouldn't we enable a commission whose job it is to manage that fair electoral process to be able to act as a check on the arbitrary use of power that would interfere with that process for something as significant as electing our most senior political officials and representatives, indeed, of the people. So we still remain concerned and unconvinced that it is inappropriate for this role to be held as an Officer of Parliament. We are very pleased to see that the independent appointment process is included, and so those appointed to the Electoral Commission are done separately from the Executive, from Government. We think that's a very good step that the Select Committee has supported. And finally, we are concerned, though, that there is no recommendation to amend the bill to give the Electoral Commission powers to provide advice and guidance on electoral financing rules. Today we've had tabled the legislation looking at electoral finance. It has been a murky area for many years with lots and lots of loopholes, some quite very recently, in 2005, exploited by members of the community and by political interests to try to win themselves an election through the use of excessive amounts of money. We know that those loopholes are actually very difficult to close, and so we must take real care around electoral finance legislation. And in taking care in building the rules, we then have to have some certainty for all the political players, political parties and third parties who engage in electioneering and campaigning, what those rules mean and clear parameters for what they can and cannot do. The consequences for political players, if they breach the rules, can be very, very severe and could impact on the results of an election and the formation of a government. I mean, that is no small thing. So we need to be sure that all the political players have certainty of the rules, over the rules, what the rules mean, how they should be applied, and whether or not that party, whether it's a political party or a third party, is acting within those rules. And there is no body, no organisation that is responsible for providing that clear advice and guidance, because the Select Committee has not given the Electoral Commission that role. And that is a mistake. it will lead to the only alternative, which is that political parties and political players will have to resort to the courts to determine the interpretation of legislation and the application of the rules to their particular case. And we will have to see if we're going to go down that path. We're talking about court case after court case, and we see them every election period. They happen every election period. Some of them could be very, very serious as to whether or not a government can form or not. These cases will have to go all the way through the court process to the Supreme Court level before they can be resolved finally, causing just ridiculous amounts of political and financial chaos and chaos in the constitutional system, simply because we haven't given the one body that we can give the right and the power to make decisions that can guide the use of those rules. It is a hole in this process that could be filled and should be filled, and if it would save considerable difficulty, particularly at a time we are still working through what are the best sets of electoral financing rules that we should have in this country to make sure we have a transparent, fair, level playing field in the election of our government. So I think this is a serious opportunity that's been missed. There's no other way to fill that gap now that this legislation is to be passed, and it will cause real problems in the future, and we will continue to see those. We can only hope that the electoral finance laws that eventually come out of the Select Committee when we manage the other legislation that's been tabled today provide some high levels of certainty. But as I say, there can never be absolute certainty in this environment. I think that's an opportunity missed and will cause real problems for us in the future as we work through those rules. Nonetheless, it's better that this is done. The reorganisation is good. We support that reorganisation and will support the bill. Thank you, sir.